Sounds perfect.
All right. So this is a very special moment for me because I have Michael Sonbert here, and he came well recommended by my business partner, Win Clayball. We were actually working out in the gym, Michael, and he's like, "Have you had Michael on your podcast yet?" And I'm like, "No, we haven't. I really need to because I heard you speak at our education leadership training seminar for the Paul Mitchell schools, and I was like, "Oh, he's good. He's really good." So thank you for being on.
Well, thanks so much for the kind words. I appreciate you having me on. I'm super excited to be here. What was the workout that you and Win were doing when he was, I mean, is this the treadmill? Are we doing
Yeah, he
CrossFit?
was
What's
on the
happened?
treadmill. I was
Okay.
lifting, free weights,
Okay. Okay.
very small weights. The most I can do is 10 pounds. So, oh well,
Okay. That's cool.
what are
I
you
like
gonna
it. I
do?
like it. I
We're
love
always
it. I
in the
love it.
gym together, the two of us. We're the
Oh,
only
that's cool.
ones that are usually in the gym, Michael, I'll have you know. So, yeah, especially with hairdressers. So, I want to introduce Michael. He's a best-selling author, a speaker, a performance coach, educator, endurance athlete, which I want to know about, autism dad, and the co-founder of CEO of Skyrocket Education and Rebel Culture. You have to go to his website, rebelculture.com. And what he's done is turned his passion into an educational forum. And he also does a lot of corporate leadership transformation, of which he did with us with the education leaders. So I enjoyed that. So from public schools to Fortune 500 companies. And I was actually stalking your website, Michael, and it's so good. I can't wait for your book to come out, first and
Yeah.
foremost. When does that come out?
That's a great question. It's we're looking at end of July 2024. So in just another month and a half or so. I'm not sure when this will air, but hopefully it's out around the time that this comes out.
Fantastic. I have two podcasts. I'll have to have you on my B series podcast. We'll call it Be a Rebel. How's that sound?
I love it. I love it. I'd be honored. That'd be super cool.
I
Thanks
love
so
it.
much.
Tell me where you came up with, first of all, the name Rebel Culture.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started much of my coaching started in K-12 schools across the US. I like to say we go to the zip codes that most people go out of their way to avoid, but then read about in the news. And so I'd be at these schools in cities like Detroit or Baltimore or Chicago, Milwaukee, Philly, wherever, and there'd be two schools that are just a block away from each other with the same external factors like poverty and trauma and shrinking educator pools and things like that. And there'd be one school where the adult culture and by kind of like by osmosis or even sometimes intentionally, the student culture was really strong. Folks were excited to be there. Things were positive, but not like glossing over the challenges, but it was there were environments where people really wanted to be there. And then at the school a block away, folks were miserable and were felt completely untethered to what matters and how we're going to operate here. And I started to look at all these different organizations, and whether it was folks I was coaching or even groups I was researching, I saw that so many people thought that the way to have a really strong adult culture was to kind of let people do whatever they want, and that it was really the opposite that was true, that it was these really small intentional moves done repeatedly, things like communicating things proactively. We've all been in that situation where you get an ask last minute. Every once in a while, that's okay, but not that can't be the norm in an organization. It makes employees skittish, frustrated, like lack of praise, lack of acknowledgement for the work that we're doing. Like when that stuff didn't exist, folks were more and more unhappy. And when leaders would take the time to just, thank people on their teams or communicate in advance or have really clear systems for how you do stuff, folks were happy. And I said, wow, like it's really in this day and age, it's really rebellious to really care about your people and to care about the little things. We say all the time, the little things are the big things. So when I'm talking to people about rebel culture, it's not that you're doing these grandiose, 22nd century things that nobody's ever thought of. It's actually all the stuff that a lot of leaders know they should be doing, but that they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's so true. And, before we jump into this, I have to know about being an endurance athlete. So what's that all about?
Yeah, so a few years ago, it's a great question. So I use that term. I've been told by a woman who rode a bicycle to like the North Pole that I can call myself an endurance athlete. But a couple of years ago, I was in a coaching group and with all these like superhuman people who did like
Mhm.
Ironman and triathlons and all this stuff. And so I registered for my first marathon a couple of years ago. I ran
Wow.
it. Then I ran another one. I ran a half marathon. I did a long distance swim. I'm doing another half marathon this year and a long distance swim up at Lake George, New York. And so, I'm not doing 100 miles yet or maybe ever, but, marathons, half marathons, swims, things like that all get me there.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
What drives you to do such a thing?
It's a great question. You know what it is? Because it's really hard for me. And
Yeah.
I am traditionally not
Yeah.
very good or even remotely good at doing things that are hard for me. And so running is it's something that I don't really particularly enjoy. I'm not like my body's not designed for it. Not that that necessarily means anything, but I'll go to the chiropractor. He'll be like, your left leg is like 2 inches longer than your right leg. I'm like, no, it's not. It just my right leg just needs to be pulled out. Like, so it's just, my back, my back's not great. So my point in a long-winded way is that, those things are a real challenge for me. And I found that when I push myself to do things that I don't traditionally do, that
Mhm.
I'm just exponentially tougher after the fact.
Mm. I love that so much because you talk a lot about that actually, and then and your website talking about doing hard things. I was reading some of your articles that you wrote, and I actually read about being in the Detroit public school. So I have home in Michigan and Florida, and
Um,
so tell us about the visit to Detroit public schools.
yeah, so it's a great question. So I'm trying to think of the exact story that you're referring
Sounded
to,
to
but
me as if they didn't want you to come speak to them because you weren't from Detroit. So you decided to
uh,
connect with the high school students the day before you
yeah,
spoke
it's
to
great,
the
great, great,
teachers.
yeah, great
So
memory.
smart.
So yeah, so one of the things I've found is that everybody thinks their context is entirely unique to them, and it's almost
Yeah,
never the case. Everybody everywhere is exactly the same.
exactly.
But people don't think that about themselves. And I wonder sometimes if that is almost an unintentional defense mechanism to say, Tina, you can't coach me, or Michael, you can't coach me. You don't understand my context when, folks are overwhelmingly similar. So I had
Mm,
a presentation scheduled for about 400 to 500 Detroit public school teachers for we were a couple weeks away, and their assistant superintendent pulled me aside and said, look, people, and the person was very like, I've worked everywhere, it's the same everywhere, but people from Detroit think their context is totally unique. I'm worried about the fact that you're from New York, you're working in Philly, that folks will feel like you don't get Detroit, you don't get our kids. And so I
mhm,
took the feedback to heart, and I asked them if they could arrange for 30 students to be in a classroom the day before my presentation, that I would teach a lesson to these 30 students, that they would record it, and then we'd show clips of it to the teachers to say like, hey, like this guy actually does know what he's talking about. And so one of the people who thought it was a really good idea, but she was like, hey, what if this doesn't work? And I'm like, I don't know, I don't have any other options. Like, it kind of has to work. So they got me not 30 students but 33, which for folks who are not familiar with classroom size, that's a very large classroom. They were sixth graders, fifth graders, and third
Oh,
graders.
wow.
Again, another huge challenge.
Yeah.
It was at 4 p.m. So the end of and these were all students who were going to summer school, so it was the end of a full day in hot summer heat. And the lesson was okay, but Tina, the point was that, what we were allowed to, what we were able to show the teachers the next day was, things that their students were capable of that they didn't know they were capable of. And I
Mm,
had people coming up to me, and none of it was about me. It was all about the kids, and and how the teachers can connect with them, you know, in a different way and teach them potentially in different ways. But I had teachers come up to me at the end of that session, and they had tears in their eyes, and they were, you know, they were hugging me because they're like, I didn't know
Mm,
what that student was capable of. Now the pessimist will say, well, of course they were great. There were 5 adults in the room, and there was a video camera. But the point I make is that, you know, that's proof that the kids are totally capable.
yeah.
And folks say this, you know, and you know, I work in both spaces, schools and the corporate world. But when we're in schools, folks say, "Oh, well, you know, they can't, they can't." Like, is that true that they can't? If it's objectively true, then that's a different conversation. But you told me that when the principal walks in, the kids are great, right? And like, so that shows that kids are capable. They're totally capable. And once we've agreed on that, I know that already. I already know that. But once the other person has agreed on that, it changes the conversation from we can't to how will we, and that's a much different story than the students are incapable.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you just hit the nail on the head, which I want to talk about our industry. Like you said, every industry is pretty much the same too. Leaders are
Yeah,
leaders, right? We all
yeah,
have the similar challenges, right, in our leadership. And I would love for you to address something that I just heard not too long ago. I was actually coaching a school owner, and he kept saying, you know, I can't be in my schools anymore. I'm not getting the respect that I used to get. And
yeah,
in my head, I'm thinking, okay, but what are you doing to earn the respect?
yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
so, like you said, when the principal walks in, they get respected. So, and we do talk a lot about, you know, controlling classroom, and also, you know, how to really connect with people. Of course, we
yeah.
train on that. But what do you think leaders are missing right now in the beauty industry in particular, of why they think people aren't respectful, so to speak?
Yeah. So it's a great question. One of the things that we've seen play out is that the paradigm has shifted, and that whether it's younger people in general or just folks in any sort of school setting, uh, that it's less that I respect you immediately, and more I need you to prove to me that you're worthy of respect.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
we could argue all day long about whether or not that's fair or that's right,
Right.
and people, you know, the person who's like screaming, "Get off my lawn!" Right? And I've sometimes been accused
Right.
of that myself. We could say, well, things were different in my day, or they were better. I don't necessarily think that's true. What I do think is that we have to be responsive to the the current paradigm. And so I would argue, and I don't know the leader that you're referencing, but I would argue that they've been operating very similarly, but the audience has changed, and that
Yeah.
they haven't caught up with that. We hear a lot of folks
Right.
say it's different now.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. It's different. Well, okay, if it's different, then what are we actually going to do
Right.
differently? And
Mhm.
so I don't know. I'm not even going to use that leader specifically, but let's just use leaders in general. Like, what are they doing when it comes to setting really clear expectations? What are they doing to manage their folks? Have they been operating like, hey, I don't need to manage Michael. I don't need to manage Tina. They're rock stars. Well, great. What happens when the rock stars leave? Like, how do the new folks operate? What are we doing when it comes to team building? I said to a team earlier today, I said, you have 16 people on your team. If I asked all 16 of them, what matters here more than anything? Give me 4 or 5 things. Would they all say really similar stuff?
Mhm.
And if the
Yeah.
answer is no, then we have a leadership problem, because
Yeah.
then what we're focused on is, or then what we're relying on is that people are just going to operate in the way that the leaders think that they should or hope that they will, without any direction for how those things should actually happen. It rarely happens that way.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. I love that question, what matters here, and see what everybody comes up with. Like, what a great anonymous survey for leaders
Yeah,
to do and see
yeah,
where everybody's head is at with that. And then you can kind of see, okay, this is where I'm missing the boat as a leader. I love your website because you give a lot of really great information. I was just
I
looking at,
appreciate that.
you know, ultimately it says wreaking havoc on your business, decrease profits, right?
Yeah,
So as you look at the decreased profits, it's caused from toxic staff culture, which is a leader that causes that. So talk about that. Like, how should a leader maintain culture? What do you advise them to do?
yeah. Well, it's funny about culture. We say that, you know, culture is like taking a shower. a building culture is like taking a shower. Just because you took a shower yesterday doesn't mean you don't still have
Yeah,
to take a shower
exactly.
today, right? It's not a one and done thing. It's a thing that's ongoing with, a slip up here or there, really potentially hurting the culture. Conversely, though, as a quick aside, when leaders have really strong culture, staff become much more forgiving of mistakes,
Mm,
and they're much more willing to be compassionate when whether it's something small like a missed email or something big like, hey, we're not gonna be able to make payroll this week and we're sorry, and like things like that, that folks are much more forgiving of those things and understanding when the culture's strong. We bucket culture into five different categories. One is around mindset. What do
mm,
leaders actually believe about themselves?
mm,
Most training is around taking action, and that's great and it makes sense. But to ask me, let's say that I'm an insecure, newer leader. I don't feel terribly well respected on my team.
mm,
I don't really know if I totally deserve the job I have. Like, either I was handpicked or I had a lot of money, so I was able to start a thing or whatever it is. It's going to be much harder for that person to execute on A, B, and C things when they don't believe in themselves. So we start when we're coaching folks around what we call leadership mindset. What do you believe about yourself? One of our questions, we say, would you work for you? And if not, why not? And
mm.
getting folks to really list those things. We have old other buckets, systems. The old expression, culture eats systems for breakfast. I push back on that. I say like,
Mm,
like culture is if culture is the car, systems is the engine. There has
right.
to be a really simple way for us to do things. I'm sure you've seen this in your work where it's like,
Mm,
you ask 10 people, like, how do you do that? And they have 10 different answers. I'm not talking about style here. You work in the beauty industry. Someone's cutting style might be different than the person next to them. What I'm interested in is like, how do we take time off here? Like, how do we put in for vacation? Like, what time do we have to arrive? Like, what does our station need to look like when we're done? Are those systems in place? So we talk about systems, we talk about communication.
mm,
Communication has to be communication isn't a thing that we do like when all else fails. It's something that we're
mm.
consistently
Yeah.
doing, whether it's remessaging what matters or telling people that we care about them, we appreciate them, we're expressing gratitude. And then two other buckets, communication and feedback, which we I'm sorry, coaching and feedback, which we
Mhm.
put together. Too many people out there are doing their jobs without any oversight.
Yeah.
And then their bosses are complaining that they're not good enough. And then those people are going to happy hour or to the wine bar or to sushi afterwards saying, my boss is useless. They don't watch what I do. They don't know what I'm doing. Like, they're like, hey, how's your boss? Well, they're okay. They leave me alone. That's a terrible answer.
Yeah.
That's a terrible answer. It's the
That's
worst thing you could
terrible.
say, right?
Yeah.
Like, my boss leaves me alone. No, my boss is
Mm,
continually driving the vision of our team. They are relentless about what matters.
mm.
Sometimes it's kind of like tough to work with that person, but I always know they care. I always know they care about me. And then the last bucket
Wow.
is accountability. Nothing matters without
Mm,
accountability. Too many leaders think it's a bad word. They think that it makes them a big meanie. They think that,
yeah.
because they had a boss who was a jerk when they were 25, that now
Mhm.
I'm 55 and it's unkind to tell people what to do or how to do it or to make sure that the thing happened. It's the absolute opposite. And
Yeah.
in fact, a recent workplace survey revealed that 91%, I think it's Gallup, but maybe it's Forbes, but 91% of employees think that their bosses could do a better job at holding everybody on the team accountable. So almost everybody, Tina, says, like, you all up there, do a better job at making
Yeah.
sure that we do the stuff that we're supposed to do. Because that's
Wow.
infuriating for somebody.
Wow.
Well, yeah, that's infuriating for people.
Hmm. Yeah, and also noticing what they're doing, right, too. Okay, let's
Yeah,
stay on this for a minute. Oversight. Love that word. We like to call it inspection,
yeah,
although we fail at it so often. And
sure, yeah.
so, coach us and the salon owners listening to this right now of how they could do a better job on oversight, if you will, slash
Yeah.
inspection. What would that look like?
Sure. So yeah, so the first thing, I'll go back to my earlier point. They have to believe that that matters, and they have to believe that they are the person who should be doing it. Too many leaders are hiding out. They're
Yeah.
hiding in plain sight. They're kind of
Yes.
running around the place. They're doing a lot of things that make them look busy.
Yep.
They're not actually
Yep.
doing the work of managing, inspecting, making
Right.
sure that other folks are operating. So they have to believe that this is something that is A, their responsibility, and that B, that's something that like that they're capable of doing. And so we start with the mindset. And when folks don't believe, which honestly happens the most often, and
Mm.
Tina, we rarely meet leaders who are incapable. What we meet are leaders, or who we meet are leaders who are, not to sugarcoat it, they're afraid. They're afraid.
Yeah.
They're afraid of what people are going to say. They're
Yep.
afraid of the pushback. We with so many leaders who are proactively blaming the people they manage for stuff
Mhm.
that they haven't even done yet. I can't give Tina that feedback. She's going to explode on me. Really? Or I can't give Michael the feedback. He's going to storm out of here. He's going to quit. Well,
Right.
really? Has that happened yet? Right. So we first have to get to
Yeah.
that place of belief. And then
Mhm.
the second thing is, and I mean, it's probably a half a dozen things, but it has to be messaged to the team that this matters and why does this matter. The word micromanager is totally overused in leadership spaces. I've
Yeah.
worked with hundreds and hundreds of leaders. I've met one who I consider to be a micromanager, someone who's like scouring their team's calendars, jumping into meetings they're not supposed to be in, they're reviewing every email before it goes out. Almost nobody's doing that. Right. And by the way, that's bad. We shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But
Right.
like messaging to the team why this matters, how this is going to be helpful for you. Even an ownership piece, too few leaders do something that sounds like, hey, team, I want to talk about my own leadership for a minute. I've been underserving you all, and I apologize for that. You deserve
Mm.
a
Good.
leader who is going to observe the work you're doing. It's going to let you know when you're nailing it and to shout you out, and also let you know when there are places where you're not hitting the bar that we've set, and then to coach you to get there. There should never be a time when you're struggling to figure this thing out because I'm not as available as I need to be. And so I'm shifting that paradigm for us starting today. And here's what you can count on me for. And that is much different than, hey
Mm.
Tina, you're screwing up.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna be all over you, and you're gonna hate it, and it's gonna be annoying, and it's gonna be random, and of course those things are not good.
Yeah. That's
The
toxic. Hmm.
Yeah, right. And the
Yeah.
final thing I'll say is, I mean, really, we have to agree on what the what looks like, right? Or what we
Mm.
the what or the how, probably more accurately. You know, too often leaders haven't defined for the team what matters, as I mentioned earlier, but also like how they're supposed to go about achieving or attaining what matters. I usually put leaders in one of three buckets when it comes to like how we do our work and what matters here. There are the folks who are in the silence bucket. They don't say a word about anything. There are the folks who are in the suggestion bucket. They make a lot of suggestions. They think they're being clear,
Mm.
but they're not. And then there are the folks that are in the agreement bucket that sound like, hey, we're always going to be on time. We're never going to be late to a meeting, to an appointment, because that's what matters. And here's why. And making sure that other folks are bought into that. And when you're operating from a place of agreement, feedback is much easier to give. If your next door neighbor came over to your house, banged on your door and said, Tina, why haven't you mowed my lawn? And you never agreed that that's a thing you do, you'd
Yeah.
be confused or furious or annoyed, or like you get that hot, like red feeling, like, how
Yeah.
dare you, right? I'm offended. But
Yeah.
if your neighbor broke their leg and you agreed that, every Friday by 5 p.m. you would mow their lawn for a month because you're helping them out, and you all like shook on that, and they
Mm.
came over and said, hey, why haven't you mowed my lawn? And you'd be like, oh, even if it stung a little bit, even if it was extra work, you'd be like, yeah, I said I would do that. We agreed on that. And that's the place that leaders have to get to with their people.
Mm.
And then, of course, schedule the time to see them in action so they can then compare what's happening with what we agreed upon.
Wow. This is so good because I've had leaders say to me on a constant basis, I just don't understand why they can't do their job.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Like, aren't you
Mhm.
supposed to be inspecting them?
That's
Like, what
right.
does
That's right.
that look like? And I think sometimes, and this has happened in our business, Michael, too, all of our companies, because we have 5 schools and 4 salons. And many times we don't set up parameters of this is how often you should be doing one-on-one, right? For
Right.
our team leaders. In fact, I just
Yeah.
stepped in with one of my team leaders in one of our schools, and I apologized. And I basically said, we've been underserving you. I want to support you
Wow.
better. And I'm going to sit in those meetings, with
Yeah.
our leader, because I want to be there for both of you,
That's great.
until I feel that, you can travel alone on this, so to speak. I'm going to be right by your side on this. And they were just like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I feel supported already. And,
Yeah.
it's all about connection, right? But
Yeah.
what do
You
you
just gave me
say
the
to a leader?
chills. You just gave me the chills right there.
Yeah.
Tina, that's awesome. I'm
Mm,
so psyched that
yeah.
you did that.
It's cool
Super
you
cool.
said that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, because I want to be transparent. I want to be vulnerable. I always want to
Yeah.
admit when I make the mistake. So if
Right.
the business is going down, the boat's, sinking, it's my fault. And so where did I miss the boat on one of these 5 strategies
Very
here,
good.
which is huge. So talk to that leader right now that always says, why can't they just do their job?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things to think about with that person. One is that likely that they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know, and they think that things should look differently than how they do. And so, as much as I like to, kick leaders' butts in, when a leader's saying stuff like that, it is oftentimes they just don't know that they should be managing as closely as they need to, that
Yeah,
how they should do it. It goes back to some of the mindset stuff I mentioned earlier. It's easier to say, over a glass of wine when you get home, that to everybody you work with is an uncaring idiot, than it is to say
right.
we're totally underperforming, and that comes back to me at the end of the day. We're just not. Most of us just aren't very good at pointing like the mirror, or reflecting the mirror back at us. So the first
Yeah.
thing I'm doing is leading with compassion with that person.
Mhm.
The second thing that I want to do is really get them to name the thing that you named, and get them to internalize that thing, which is, everything that happens here has to be on you at the end of the day. That's probably going to be uncomfortable. You're probably not going to love that, at least initially. But if it's not on you, then who is it on? Right? Who is it? Who is it going to? Who is it? Whose responsibility is it if it's not ultimately on you? Understanding that, look, you're going to have people who just aren't a fit, and there will be people you need to let go. We all understand that, but if the whole team, or if a whole faction of the team is underperforming or going rogue, or operating in ways that are inconsistent with what the leader is envisioning, the leader has to own that that's a communication thing on their part, because either they never said anything about it, or they have, and then people ignored it, which is what often happens. These are often the leaders that are making suggestions and then not holding anybody accountable. And so
Right. Right.
once we get this idea that it has to come back to you, that's the only choice. I say that at our trainings all the time: if not you, then who? If not you, then who? This was born out of my own struggles with a child with, very severely profound autism,
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to, not knowing how to be his dad, and having real struggles with, like, what does it look like to parent him, and this is harder than I want it to be, and why is he like this? And a friend just being like, hey man, like you don't have a choice. Like, you gotta, like, I don't have his bees dad. He's like, you don't have a choice, man. If not you, then who? It was
Mm-hmm.
like a paradigm shift moment for me, and we try to get leaders to that place. And then, of course, after that, we're skill building. And to your point from a moment ago, we've got to set really clear parameters for how often things happen. How often are we going to shadow the team? How often are we going to have those one-to-ones? How often are we going to have team meetings? Then, even in the, like, in the getting more in the weeds there, what do those team meetings look like? Are they agenda driven? Are those agendas sent out 24 hours in advance? Is there an opportunity for everybody at the table to engage? Having a meeting just to have a meeting that's
Right.
totally aimless makes people insane. They feel like they're being held prisoners. So
Yes. Yeah.
then we're looking at skill building after that.
Wow. Yeah, that is all part of it. And so that was one of the reasons why I'm stepping in to help lead those meetings, so it becomes more of a collaborative, safe environment too,
Very
right?
cool. Yeah.
And so I feel like you can't just empower, like roll the baton at them. You got to stay with them for a little bit,
That's
too. I
right.
think
That's
leaders
right.
sometimes just ditch and dive, they're out of there. I'm leaving. You're good. You've read your job description.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I love that. I know we're getting towards the end of this, which I absolutely hate. What else? So I want to touch on this before we start to end this out, because I do hear often from different team members that will say, no one follows the systems around here. And so I love the 360-degree leader principle. So training that. So how to train team members, how to hold their peers accountable and what that might look like, right?
Yeah.
What advice would you give team players to hold their teammates accountable instead of always constantly running to the boss? Like, hey, so-and-so is not following these systems.
Yeah. It's a great question. We actually run a training on this for teams. In fact, globally, I just ran one for Google in East Asia, which caused me to, I think it was at 3 in the morning my time, to
Wow.
make sure that everybody on there go, which is fine. I don't mind waking up early, but
Yeah.
we ran a training on this very thing for those folks. The first thing is, and I mean, this, however long I'm here on this earth, this should be on my gravestone. Like, we have to agree on what matters. We have to agree on how we're going to operate, because in the absence of that, if Michael thinks Tina should have done X, but that's not a norm for us, that's not something that is messaged so often and so repeatedly that we could all recite it in our sleep. As one of my mentors says to me, Michael, message it until they mock you. Yeah, we know, Michael. Like, we should, like, we're problem solvers here. We're never going to bring you a problem without having at least two solutions. If leaders aren't leading in that way, it becomes really hard for them, and especially people's peers, to give them feedback, because we haven't agreed on the thing.
Mm,
The person knocking on your door and saying, hey, why haven't you mowed my lawn? Right? If I said I was going to pick you up at the airport, that would happen. Nothing would stop me, right? And so, like, teams need to operate in that way. Hey, we always meet deadlines. Hey, we always proactively communicate if we're having a challenge. I bet there are leaders who are listening to this right now who are like, I have to chase my team down to find things.
yeah.
I have to chase them down to wonder whatever happened with that deliverable, or what happened. Like, give me the follow-up from that meeting. And that all speaks to a lack of clear expectations for how we're going to operate. Now, once leaders define that, which, by the way, is not
Mm,
terribly easy, it's relatively easy. Now, making that thing live is where this is hard. And you've probably seen this in your work. And I've seen it dozens and dozens of times where a team says that we care about X. They have a nice, shiny set of core values, or a vision statement, or a mission statement. And then Tina, not only does nobody even operate in accordance with it, but nobody even knows it.
yeah.
Nobody can recite it.
Right.
Nobody can
Right.
say it. Right.
Right.
It's like the waiter not, or the chef not knowing the menu, or the quarterback not knowing the playbook, or the pilots not knowing the coordinates. So once teams are impeccably clear on those things, leaders then need to message to everybody, like, feedback matters here, and provide actual sentence starters. If folks, I don't think this is on our website, but if after this comes out, if folks are interested and they reach out to you, I'd be happy to share what we've created. But really simple sentence starters and ways that the conversation can occur. And it sounds like, hey, Tina, can I give you some feedback? Now, nobody in the whole history of the world has ever said no to that. People are interested. So, like, yeah, sure. Like, hey, Tina, earlier when you said X about one of the hairdressers, it really didn't feel like it embodied our value of unwavering belief, that kind of we all agree to have for each other. I'm sure you didn't mean anything by it, but I just really want to ask you to, like, think about your word choice going forward, because I can imagine if that person heard you, that they'd be devastated. Boom, conversation over. Now, is Tina, like, then, like, going home like that that MFer? Like,
Yeah.
maybe, but
Maybe.
probably
Yeah.
more, like, yeah, holy cow. Like, I feel like did I let the person down? Did I, like, you know, I'll share this quick example, and I know we're almost at time, but at the beginning of all of our trainings, we ask, whether it's a room of 15 people, or 1,500, to put their phones away. That if you have an emergency, step out and handle it. But that what we're not looking for is, 50 people to be on their phones at any given time, right? If there's an emergency, we get it, handle it. If there's even something that's just important, step out, handle it. Let the people around you know you're stepping out. If it's a small enough space, let us know, but come back and then be present. Because if you're on your phone and I'm on my phone and they're on their phones, next thing you know, no one's paying attention. Every single time we've ever run a training, somebody's been on their phone, and every single time we've called it out. Mostly individually, but sometimes if it's too many people, we'll make a larger announcement. Those people always come up to us at the end of the session. They're mortified. They feel horrible. And they say, I just had to blah, blah, blah. I say, I get it. But like, we agreed we weren't going to do that, right? And that's why I said something to you about that. They're not in trouble. They're not wrong. They're not bad. They're not bad people. It's not about their character. It's just about you're not doing the thing that we agreed on. And I just want to name it for you. And that's the way we get there.
I love that, which kind of goes full circle and from what we were talking about in the beginning. And you said message them until they mock you, which I love, controlling the classroom, right? And getting that respect. I think it's just like setting the agreements right at the get-go. I just want to set up are we good? Before we get started today. And so as I'm gonna let you share some last thoughts, but I should have this an 8-hour interview because it's so good. I have so many questions. We'll definitely have to have you back. But as you think about classroom management, what else do you see that, because I was just doing a class for some brand new students, and it was interesting because I went around the room at the end. And so how much does it matter how people sit? Okay. So, and I always they probably mocked me here because they're like, oh, Tina has to have them sit in a circle. Well, there's a reason, because they connect better, they pay more attention. And all I'm looking for is to connect with every single person in that room. I want everyone to know that they matter every time I'm in the room. And the one girl, and I've never had a student say this to me because they don't pick up on this. She said, I don't have an aha, but I did notice something about you. I hope you don't mind if I share. And I'm like, oh gosh, it's probably something bad,
Right. That's what we go
And
to.
she's like, I just noticed that you connected with every single person in the room. And I wanted to cry because I've had to be intentional about that, because people do matter, right? And so as like a facilitator, an instructor, a leader in a meeting, how much does all of these things matter to gain that respect and also full participation?
Yeah, it matters immensely. And first of all, kudos to you for doing that and for getting the shout out from that student. We don't know each other terribly well, but that is reflective of who I know you to be. And so I'm really happy that other folks are calling that out and sharing that, because that matters immensely that you're doing that. So kudos. I we didn't talk about this because it didn't come up, but I started Rebel Culture because I saw that there were so many people I knew, I worked with, I'd interacted with at different points, who were spending a third of their lives wildly unhappy at work and coming home and saying, like I discussed earlier, hey, how's work? It sucks. How's your boss? He's a moron. He doesn't know what I do all day, all this stuff. And I think that's the biggest ripoff. I probably to a fault sometimes, I just think life should be awesome. It should be awesome, which doesn't mean that it won't ever be hard, but we should do awesome stuff, and we should do it with awesome people, and we should be passionate, and we should care about the things we care about and be really excited about them. And I saw way too many people who got into law, but then hated their boss, or got into this and hated where they worked. And while there might be some people who'd never be happy anywhere, okay, but that's a small group of people. Most people really want to be excited about the thing that's in front of them. It's our responsibility as leaders to connect with them in the way you discussed, and to set really clear expectations, and to make sure that they're held accountable. Folks should never feel like they're on a high wire by themselves. No, we should be there alongside them until it's time. And so those things matter immensely, not just to make sure that, obviously the respect is part of it, sure, but to make sure that they're fulfilled during the process, and to make sure that it matters to them. And so I'll give this final piece of coaching, because we talked a lot about a lot of bigger things, saying we got in the weeds a little bit. The most common thing that we see when it comes to classrooms, whether it's in the K-12 ed space, higher education, in your context with the salons, is that teachers are talking, and sometimes it's trainers like us. We're talking to people who aren't listening to us,
Yeah.
and they haven't. It's a micro thing. But if everybody listening to this, who's an instructor or a trainer, make sure that when they're saying something, it's the most important thing that they've said that day until the next thing they say, and that they're getting everybody's attention. They're willing to say, "Hold on, pause for a second, Michael. Just give me your eyes up here. Give me your eyes up here." My Long Island accent just came up.
Yeah.
Hey, Tina, do me a favor. All right, focus up here. Awesome. All right, I have everybody right now. This is perfect. Okay, let me explain to you about what we're going to do now. If folks can lead and teach and instruct and train in that way, it absolutely changes the dynamic in the room. What happens oftentimes is people on the receiving end get used to being allowed to ignore whoever's in front of them.
Yeah.
They're allowed to ignore the person in front of them. The
Mhm.
person in front of them doesn't want to be ignored. They just don't really know how to get everyone's attention. And then what happens is we've got 15 people in front of us, or 200, and half of them are checked out. And then we get to the end and we feel, as the person in front, like we failed. People don't respect me.
Right.
I'm embarrassed. I don't want to come back here. It's about them. No, we've got to get people's attention. Make sure we're talking to an audience who's listening to us.
Wow. What a great, great, great interview. I can't thank you enough. Okay,
Oh,
so
man.
what's the best way for people to find you and keep in touch with you? I get your newsletter and I love it. So
Oh, yeah.
up some
Well, yeah.
great, great information.
Cool. I appreciate that. Yeah, the newsletter is easy. Just go to rebelculture.com, sign up for the Driven, which is the newsletter. It'll be a pop-up a couple seconds after you log on. Check me out at LinkedIn. It's Michael Sonbert. I don't know my Instagram, but I think it's michael.sonbert.
Okay.
Or anybody could email me at michael@rebelculture.com. I'd love to chat.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. What's some last leadership advice you want to give people in the beauty industry that you've been dying to say?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, this isn't specific to the beauty industry necessarily, but it's really specific to just leaders in general. People want to be led.
Yeah.
They want to know that someone's in charge.
Mhm.
Nobody wants the pilot while the turbulence is rocking the plane side to side to hear the pilot say, "I don't know how I'm going to figure this out," or to be screaming, be screaming and wailing into the intercom, or to be saying nothing at all. People want to be led. It's
Mhm.
a misconception that they do. I believe it's your responsibility to lead them.
Yeah. Amen to that. We've said that for many years in the Maxwell leadership is people deserve to be led well.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
I love
That's
that,
really right.
Michael. That's
Thanks,
awesome.
Tina.
I appreciate you. God bless. Take
God
care.
bless you as well. This was
All
awesome.
right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.